So we had talked about Sony earlier this week with Shawn Layden leaving, and it was kind of out of nowhere. It was announced in a single tweet with no other information really to go on, just that Shawn Layden is leaving. And we wish him well in his future endeavors, right? A very corporate, I guess, response, but on Twitter, it seems strange. Nothing else really followed. In fact, I was kind of sure something would throughout the week, and I kind of just sat there waiting. I was like, all right, well, we'll get something from Sony. Sony will say something about Shawn Layden leaving. There might be some kind of explanation even from Shawn Layden himself, but nothing. And it was very, very odd. And now, I think because of that, we have quite a few theories, we'll say, going around right now, with a couple of places reporting on a power struggle. Now, this happens in the business world, right? We've seen it, I think, before. But the thing about this is it seems like a bad time for all of this to be taking place as they're going into the launch of their next system, the PlayStation 5, which is going to be ramped up heavily this year coming up. I mean, it's going to be an exciting year coming up because we're going to get new hardware at the end of it, and it's always fun building up to that new hardware, and we'll talk about the new Xbox and the new PlayStation, all of that, while we're building up to it here. But looking at Sony's back end with the business and everything and the restructuring that appears to be going on, doesn't seem to be going very well, even with some of the third parties, which we'll talk about here as well, because since we talked about it this week, several places have been reporting, specifically one about third-party companies not being happy with some of them actually being quoted with, of course, being anonymous to protect them, I guess, but interesting stuff here. So, couple of different things to go over. WCCF Tech, for example. Sony power struggle may have forced Layden out. PS5 plans reportedly mired in confusion. Now, I want to point this out. A lot of this stuff, to me anyway, sounds like it might be speculation or hearsay, of course. Nothing from Sony themselves. We also saw another person actually retire. That one seems much more straightforward and heavily contrasting what we've seen with Shawn Layden leaving. So that one was, I think, a better example as to how it should have happened as opposed to what happened with Shawn Layden here. Now, a lot of this seems to come from Game Daily. Now, GameDaily.biz ran an article here that really goes over everything that's been happening. And when I look at this and some of the previous stuff, I think Sony is pretty much looking at Jim Ryan as the person that's going to lead them into the next generation against Microsoft. Of course, Andrew House is not with Sony anymore, really, in a leading role. Shawn Layden is backing off. And now we pretty much have, at this time, Jim Ryan and John Codera. But even that situation was a bit strange as well. And like I said, it's pretty much been Jim Ryan, from what I could tell, kind of climbing up higher and higher in the ladder to, I guess, run the whole show when the PS5 happens. So this was the article written up by GameDaily.biz. The departure of Worldwide Studios chairman was announced with little fanfare, and one third-party source tells Game Daily recent PlayStation globalization is exponentially exacerbating next-gen transition. It's going to be an interesting transition for sure. Now, I think the PlayStation 5 will be backwards compatible, and that will help somewhat, right? But it's going to be interesting to try to get consumers on board with the PS5 immediately, unless there is some groundbreaking feature that's easy to describe, I would say, to consumers. Because if you say it does 4K, well, they've been saying the PlayStation 4 Pro does 4K, so they're going to need to come up with something new to tell consumers about this. That's why you keep hearing, when you see phones getting announced several times, a lot of them have looked towards things that consumers can recognize as being better, like cameras, which is why I think the iPhone has like the splinter cell camera on the back. But cameras are very easy to describe to consumers as being better. So that's why you don't see them say, oh, look at how great this processor is in the phone. I mean, the phones are so fast now, like it's hard to compare one to the other as being better through that. So they do all kinds of other stuff to try to show. We have higher refresh rate screens now on phones, a lot of things just outside of how powerful they are, which I think is kind of the direction we'll see some of these game consoles go in as well. We already hear about the solid state drives and everything, but let's go a little further here. There's the tweet, of course, that did announce it, and you can see that's all we've had so far. A lot of likes around it, right? Retweets, messages, but a lot of people who were confused as to why there wasn't anything else beyond this. I mean, Shawn Layden's been with He's been in Sony for a long time. So it's odd to see him just kind of, we're out, tweet, see ya. That one has kind of thrown a lot of people off. In fact, as they say here, there was a follow-up to Polygon since then, and all Sony said is there's no information at this moment, no other information, nothing to describe what happened. And you can see Layden joined Sony in 1987. Think about that. That's a long time ago. He joined before there was a PlayStation. Jim Ryan also came on before there was a PlayStation and helped to kind of build that up. But since then, he had been basically overseeing Europe for Sony. And now the thing that is being described as happening here is Sony is pretty much putting everything for their PlayStation, all that, under one umbrella, right? So there's going to be pretty much one, group running everything rather than like the Americas, Europe, Japan. It's all going to be pretty much under one umbrella that's running all of this. And they mention a power struggle when all of this comes together because, well, somebody has to lead, right? Somebody has to run it. And that's where we've seen Jim Ryan slowly kind of work his way up, I guess, switching roles with John Codera. If you remember that was an interesting situation. Codera was appointed Sony Interactive Entertainment president at the time, right? And CEO, and John Codera swapped roles. He became the deputy president, and Jim Ryan took over his position. It was very, very strange. Again, almost like they said, okay, well, Jim Ryan is the clear-cut leader here. John Codera is going to focus on network and other things with PlayStation, right? So we'll switch them around. That's kind of what that seemed like. So we hear about Shawn Layden departing, and that's where we're starting to hear more and more about there being pretty much, I guess, a power struggle force out, and that's why people are believing that right now, because it looks that way. Like, if you look at it from the outside, yeah, that's what it looks like. And Sony has not said much to stop, I guess, the speculation here. Now, what's interesting about this is we heard from some third parties supposedly talking to GameDaily.biz, saying this is the least amount of clarity we've ever had on a new console this close to transition. I believe that the global restructuring is exponentially exacerbating the already difficult process of transitioning to a new generation, and now we're getting nervous, very nervous. So what seems to be going on here, like I said, is a restructuring, but I'm not 100% sure if that is the best strategy to do now. But if they're going into another generation, okay, they, I guess they want to get everything situated. And Jim Ryan himself has talked about complacency. He said, hey, when you are the lead console, right, this generation, it doesn't always work out the following generation. In fact, more times than not, it doesn't. Like, right, we saw the PS2 going into the PS3. That was insane, right? I mean, they got pushed around by Microsoft and Nintendo, and it wasn't until everyone stopped caring that the PlayStation 3 finally passed the Xbox 360. Basically, we're talking about Xbox One and PlayStation 4 by the time that happened. We all had them. So it wasn't great for them there, but I guess going from the PS1 to the PS2 was, and going from the PS3 to the PS4 was a good turnaround for them. Now, what's interesting about Jim Ryan, and I want to point this out, Jim Ryan seems to kind of go, I guess, in contrast, I'll say, to what Shawn Layden's thought process was. Shawn Layden was looking more and more at native gameplay. Gameplay just on your system, right? No need to connect to the internet or cloud or anything like that. Whereas Jim Ryan is a bit more interested in cloud gaming, cloud computing, PlayStation Now, right? He is. And John Codera, of course, being his deputy president, is going to help out with the networking side and everything. He seems very, very confident on what he can do there. And think about what we've seen very recently happen, right? PlayStation Now drops in price. We see them taking Grand Theft Auto 5, God of War, Uncharted 4, Infamous Second Son for a couple of months. Nice little window there to play those. You also don't need a PlayStation 4 necessarily to play them. Those were games like Uncharted 4, Infamous Second Son, God of War, that you needed a PlayStation to play, but not anymore. In fact, it's actually become a bit better to play it even. And now it's still 720p, it's still compressed, still has input latency and everything, but it is an interesting shift because now that they have this handshake agreement supposedly with Microsoft, that quality could get better. And it almost seems like Jim Ryan is looking at this situation as, yes, the PS5 is important to us. We want to launch it well. We want to have some good hardware, some good software, but we don't want to just focus on this, I guess, tunnel vision of having this system and that's it. They don't have a PlayStation Vita, for example, anymore. They've cut that out. But maybe all of this stuff that's going on is leading up to Sony also heavily leaning into cloud gaming to the point where you don't necessarily need a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 to play their first party games. Wouldn't that be a strange future, right? We get to the point where you don't need these game consoles to play these first party games. You can get them and have a better experience than cloud gaming, but I think a lot of people assume that eventually technology will catch up and cloud gaming will be fine. It's going to be, this is a weird future we're heading into right now, okay? Interesting stuff, I think, that could be happening here. And now we're pretty much, I think, going to see what happens here with Jim Ryan at the helm. We see crossplay becoming normalized now across the board, even for Sony. So PS5, maybe a game comes out. That's going to be the biggest tell. If a game comes out, let's say the next God of War comes out, and you can play it through PlayStation Now as well as on the PlayStation 5, similar to what Microsoft is looking to do with xCloud, I believe, where they're going to start having those games also available on phones and other places probably as well. That will be a massive turnaround for Sony with what their strategy has been in the past. Maybe they're not as interested going forward with the just, I guess, 100 million that they could be selling to rather than the hundreds of millions, billions even, when it comes to streaming and just reaching anyone with a web browser at that point. Interesting stuff here. Also, we're going to wait for more information because Sony still has not released anything, really, about what's going on with Shawn Layden, almost like they want to keep it quiet. So let me know what you guys think about this whole situation down below. Is there this internal power struggle and Shawn Layden was like, you know what, I've been here since the 80s. I'm going to retire. I'm good. Don't worry about it. I'm out. And then I guess where they'll go with this. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.